So good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. This is the April Business Survival Call Sales and Marketing Series. Thank you for joining me. We've got some fun stuff to talk about today. And as always, I welcome your questions. Feel free to type them in at any time. Hopefully you know the drill by now that use the Q&A box to type your questions in there. I'll see them on my screen. We'll get them answered. And make this as a fulfilling an afternoon for you as it will be for me, or morning, wherever it is that you might be. See, with a couple of people here, it's the evening for you. Thank you for joining us on a Friday night. So we all know how to use the Zoom thing. So let me tell you what's on my mind this week. This is going to be a short one, but I have a lot of questions, or a lot of answers to questions that I want to talk about, save some time for. One of the things, when I get a call, in the executive call earlier today, I talked a lot about, what do owners ask me, when they call, they say, how do we get to the next level? When sales managers call me and say, hey, Tom, I'm really interested. We want to do some sort of sales commission and bonus incentive plan, blah, 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 blah. And surprisingly, and this may shock many of you, I would say probably 75% of the companies that I encounter do not have a commission plan in place, particularly in the live events world. It's surprisingly uncommon, and you would think otherwise, because we seem to be a very, commission-driven culture. But in small companies, it's really unusual to see one implemented, and certainly to see one that's effective and it actually works. And so I started trying to understand why. It seems obvious we should have sales incentives. I mean, that seems like a fundamental thing. We want to drive the results that are valuable to us. We want to incentivize the things that will make a difference in the business in terms of growth and profitability, the types of business we want to do. Seems obvious, but it's not happening, and it's because it's harder than it looks. So I've tried to figure out a little bit more about why. How do we get companies to the point where sales incentives make sense? And I apologize here because you've got a hand-drawn item. I haven't turned this into a graphic yet, or more importantly, I should say my team has not turned this into a graphic yet. But what is it? What are the factors that address whether or not you're ready for sales incentives? And I found that there's two. There's two fundamental issues that keep coming up that affect where we fit into developing this kind of a program. So the first question I want to ask is, are your margins at or below expectations? And it's very straightforward. And for many of us, our margins are less than we want them to be, but actually some of you have some fairly high margin businesses and you do rather well at protecting the bottom line, certainly at the cost of goods sold or the gross profit level. I don't know how you're paying for the palaces that you're in that is killing your net profit, but your gross profit looks pretty good. But a lot of folks have less gross profit than they would actually like to have. Neither here nor there. We just need to know where you fit on that line. And then the other question we need to answer, or be able to answer, is, do you have a clear understanding of your pipeline? In other words, are you able to forecast well? And oddly enough, a lot of you don't, but some of you have a pretty good understanding of your forecast, and you can tell me how many open quotes you have for a certain time period and what the probability is for getting them, and what your projected revenue might be for next month, if not next quarter, and can be pretty accurate at that. And that's gratifying because that's an important skill to have. It's something that I worked on for many years when I actually had a real job, and I was very good at it. So I'm very happy when I see people succeed at doing that. So depending on your responses to those two questions, those two criteria, it tells me what we need to do in order to work on, to move you into an incentive program or a commission program of some sort. So we ended up with 4 quadrants. You know the drill, right? So if we're not very good at forecasting. If, in other words, we don't know how to interpret our activity and translate it into a forecast, and we're not particularly good or consistent at capturing the margins we would like to have. So we're low margin, a little unclear on the forecast. It puts us in the bottom left on quadrant 1. If you're in quadrant 1, before we can introduce an effective incentive plan, I've got some management work to do. We have to work on the management side of it, because we need to make some corrections either in managing margin or managing the forecast so that we have something to work with. So without a clear forecast and without control over margins, I don't have a lot to incentivize. If I incentivize margins and say you need to improve margins when margins are low, but we don't know how to create high margins, I'm not going to have success through the sales process. And margins aren't completely in the control of salespeople, by the way. So we're going to have to do some work on the management, and that could be any one of a number of things. We need some clarity. We need some processes. We need to structure the org chart in such a way that we have people who have authority over things like forecasting, setting pricing, addressing the issues that affect low margins. These are all management issues, and we get some clarity on these things, then we will move into another category. So let's assume that we get a better control of our margins. In other words, typically what's going to happen is we'll go in, we'll look at the pricing structure, we'll look at the assumptions about costs, make adjustments in what we may charge for labor or how much labor we put on jobs and what our expected margin is. What's the margin that we expect to make on product? Sometimes I find that companies have a 10 or 20-year-old assumption about which part of their business should be making the most money. For instance, if you're a systems integration company, you should know by now that you don't make money on equipment, therefore you need to be making money on design, on service, on installation, on project management, things that you might have done for free in the past. If you're a live events company, your equipment discounts have gotten much higher. Therefore, you can't just kind of pass through labor like you did in the past. We can't just eat the trucking or absorb the travel. We've got to be more diligent about capturing those margins. So assuming we make those adjustments, now I'm in a situation where I have better margins and I can do incentives based on revenue. I'll give you an extreme example. I was hired in to help a company who essentially they were struggling with cash flow. A large organization, they actually had 17 salespeople, and the cash flow issue was pretty mechanical. It was just simply reintroducing discipline that they used to have about getting deposits and things like that. And there wasn't a profitability issue in there. But what we discovered was a lack of discipline in their pricing structure. That was leaving some margin on the table. So we were actually able to improve margin through better discipline of the pricing that was already set up. And that increased their margins, which allowed us to put an incentive plan in place that instead of being based on the gross profit generated, in other words, their system inherently generated high gross profit and the salespeople didn't have a lot of control over the pricing, we were able to incentivize them on revenue, which encouraged them to go out and get more business, to devote more time to process more opportunities themselves, to drive their revenue numbers up and the amount of business and number of clients they could manage, because the margin was kind of built in. So if you've got good control of your margin, then we can incentivize the revenue that you're generating, rather than getting into the complex calculations of gross profit calculations. Gross profit is sold, gross profit is earned, which costs apply to which job, and all that kind of noise that makes doing gross profit incentives very difficult. Now, if on the other hand, we are really good at forecasting, but we're not really good at controlling margins, then I can create an incentive plan that's actually based on incentivizing the margins. In other words, I'm going to pay people for paying more attention to margins. And I can do that if I can see the pipeline, if I can see how much business there is up ahead. I need management intervention into a system like this, because what makes this work is dynamic pricing, which is driven from management. And management needs to look at the timelines, looks at the pipeline of the organization and say, you know, based on our forecasts, we have capacity, unsold capacity in June. Therefore, we're going to create margin expectations that are a little bit lower so that we can probably win a little bit more business, not lose as many jobs on price, for instance. But I'm going to incentivize the margin that we do get so that we don't go down too low. So having some insight into the forecast allows us to make choices about what margins we're willing to take. And I'm going to incentivize margin, because the more margin, well, this individual job might have a lower margin, therefore a lower commission. Because we are not at capacity, I can sell another job, which also has a commission based on margin. And that's how, as a salesperson, I can increase my earnings, is sell more jobs. Management creates the capacity and makes the capacity available to sell. Let's say we get our acts together. We're good at looking at the pipeline and we're good at controlling margins. What am I going to incentivize? Well, if I continue to incentivize revenue and or gross profit, I'm going to get probably flat results. And what typically happens is salespeople will get to an earning level they're comfortable with and then stop earning. In other words, if $2 million is the sales mark and the salesperson's making his nut and he doesn't have to work any harder to live the lifestyle that he wants, he's not going to sell anymore. All right, that's a problem. Now we're in a position to, instead of incentivizing, margin or revenue or a combination of both, I'm going to incentivize growth. I may still have a margin component and a revenue component, but my incentives are going to be based on a percentage of the growth. And in other words, you're going to have a floor. And this is when we hear the word quotas, which strikes fear in the heart of all salespeople. And that's because sometimes quotas, their incentives don't kick in until they get to the quota, but you don't have to do it that way. But if I can get a change, if I can get a 10% growth out of somebody, that's very valuable. And it's valuable for your business because I'm using the same capacity. So why wouldn't I incentivize that more? And then next year, growth would be above that number. And then growth would be above the number after that. So growth is a great way when you have control over the trajectory. So the answer, the long convoluted answer is, Tom, can you help me with sales incentives? And is, yeah, it depends. Let's figure out where you are. What do we need to do for your business to make you ready for sales incentives? So I think that's all I was going to say on that. If you have a question about that, feel free to slip it in there. And I see one question coming up here that says, how far out in your pipeline do you need to see before you have clarity? Okay, that's a good question, because that's going to vary from business to business, and it's also going to vary around the time of year. I had this conversation actually just yesterday with a client. There are certain times of year, for instance, in the live events business, when you can see farther ahead. Typically in the corporate world, Q1, January, February, March, that pipeline becomes apparent back in October and November. Whereas the April, May, and June quarter usually doesn't start to solidify until late March. And the lead times become shorter. You may work from a 10 or 12 week lead time for Q1 to a 6-week lead time, or even a 3-week lead time for Q2, and other times of the year have different amounts of lead time. And that's going to affect how far out you can look and what's an appropriate forecast. So there is no one right number for all companies. Integration companies have to be able to see at least 6 months in their pipeline. Sometimes they can see as many as 12, depending on how good the economy is and what's driving it. So it'll depend. great question. Thank you for asking. All right. Now, some of your questions that were sent in, and if you have more questions about incentives, feel free to drop them in there. I certainly have talked about them before. Um, questions about introverts and sales. Okay. All right. This is going to be good. So the question came in to me. I heard something you said in a recent call and realized that all of my salespeople are introverts. Um, I'm an introvert, so I talk about introverts from time to time. Um, this person says, I'm an extrovert. This is the owner of the company. I put that note in there. They hate initiating phone calls, but will talk all day about projects and return calls as needed. Do I need new salespeople? So I think the question is, do salespeople need to be extroverts? And the answer is no. No, they don't need to be. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert is neither here nor there. There's a sales success formula for everyone. What we're dealing with are different personality styles, and one of the if you read about extroverts, one of the things you'll learn is that extroverts generally assume that everybody else is an extrovert. They're not always good at recognizing introversion, whereas introverts know exactly who's an introvert and an extrovert. And the difference between the two, for you extroverts out there who don't understand this, is that extroverts are energized by interaction with people, particularly mass interaction. You put an extrovert in a room full of people and they will leave with more energy than they came in with. If you put an introvert in a room full of people, they will leave in a body bag. It just sucks the life out of them over time. Some of us have capacity to be an extrovert for a while, but it's generally a limited capacity. So extroverts are generally happy to pick up the phone. I've had many owners, but I have one guy in particular I'm thinking of who could not talk on the phone. If he got into his car and he was going to drive for 20 minutes, he'd make 5 phone calls. And if somebody wasn't there, he'd hang up and he'd call the next person, just kind of go down the list, just say hello, ask a question, just chat, whatever. That was his jam. It's what kept him going. Introverts, and we see a lot of this in folks who are project and production manager type folks, they're often process driven. They will like to talk about the project. They like to talk one-on-one, and they're very happy to do that if it's in the context of the project, and that's energizing to them because they get to do the thing that they love to do. So no, you don't need new salespeople. What you need to do, the whole point of all this is you need to adapt. And you have a team that has a variety of personalities, and there's a place for everyone, but we can't expect them all to perform to the same results in the same way. Now, salespeople is always dangerous. That's a dangerous term in our business because most of the people in the industry that I serve are not actually salespeople. We're order takers, we're project managers, we're production managers, we're doers, not salespeople. We're from the working side of the business as opposed to the selling side of the business. Not all, but certainly a lot of us are. So we have to adapt to the styles. If, in the case of this individual who sent me the question, if you've got a team full of introverts and your role as an extrovert doesn't allow you to be the salesperson that you need to be to grow the business, hire an extrovert. Hire an extrovert to do business development. This is why I talk about business development separately from sales, is because what most of us call salespeople are really business development people. You want out them hunting for business and bringing it back to the mothership. And sometimes we expect them to shift gears and put a sales hat on than be a salesperson. But I'm much more of a mind that you hire a business development person, they go out, they bring business back, and they turn it over to a salesperson, and then business development goes out there and gets some more business. And I find that that works better, more consistently, plays to everybody's strengths. The idea of picking up the phone, which is hard for introverts to do, particularly if there's not a good reason to do it other than to sell something or do business development, that's not a valid enough reason for some introverts to engage. What many would rather do is simply send an email, which drives extroverts nuts. So if you've got an extroverted sales manager or owner and your solution to finding business and seeing if that job's going to happen again or getting an update from the client is to send an email. Uh, they often find that irritating because they know that picking up the phone is sometimes very fast and very easy. You know what? There's nothing wrong with sending an email if it gets the results that you need. When I started consulting 10 years ago, and I spent a lot of time then chasing business because my marketing had not fully kicked in and didn't do the heavy lifting for me that it does now. I had to chase business a little bit, and if I got a lead, I kind of had to follow up with them. And there was one company in particular who was a great lead. We had great conversation in person because I think we met at Infocom or whatever, and we talked about his project. I happened to visit his office. We talked about the project. I got him a proposal, and then I got nothing. Ever happened to you? You send a proposal and the customer goes dark? Well, here's the guy. Here's the classic example. I emailed him. I left voicemails. I emailed. I left voicemails. I emailed. I left voicemails. Guess what? He didn't like responding by email. He never checked his voicemail. But one day, out of the blue, I got a text message from him about something completely different. It was actually a personal question, and what I discovered was he would answer a text about anything. So we ended up having a 15-minute conversation on text, which progressed the opportunity. We started talking dates. I could always get him by text. I couldn't get him any other way. Just extraordinary. And the guy was an extrovert too. It was interesting. So use the communication tool that works and just get over the personality differences between you and your team. So for those of us who have to communicate or have to find reasons to communicate for clients, we can help each other by creating the reasons to communicate. In some of the selling programs and webinars we've talked about before about developing leads, I think the webinar 100 Days of Leads, I talk about this. Creating invitations is very important. And an invitation could be, hey, we're going to have an open house. There's the classic AV business development invitation, marketing opportunity. Come over, come see our new products, come to our tech fair. But an invitation can also be, hey, we're having fajitas on Friday here at the office. Why don't you come by? An invitation could be, there's a demo on a new product, or I'd like you to meet our new design engineer. I wonder if you could share some of your thoughts with him about the future of AV in your space. People respond better to an invitation for something, whether they personally benefit or not. Inviting somebody to give a testimonial is actually a fairly effective way to get their attention. So give your introverts something to ask about that potentially has value for the customer, and you'll be able to work better with your team. And that also brings us to about enforcing the diamond. So, the bow tie effect. We're trying to alleviate the one-to-one bottleneck that we create between sales and the customer, and turn the bow tie around and create a diamond so that we have many people in my organization talking to many people in your organization, and that creates stronger bonds. Invitations help that. So sometimes if you're trying to get information from customers, it helps to have a different team member make the phone calls that your salesperson doesn't enjoy, is not particularly good at it. If you don't enjoy something, you're not going to be good at it. So finding somebody who likes to make phone calls and extend invitations might be the solution as well. All right, another question here. Oh, yeah, great. We're going to talk about some newsletters and a bunch of stuff here. The question started, I wanted to start leveraging my mailing list and get a monthly newsletter out. Yay. I'm thinking of featuring a product and an employee and a client. What do you think? All right. Good for you. You're thinking about newsletters. I don't like the subject matter, and I'll explain why. Okay. If you're going to do a newsletter or some sort of informative email, make it about the reader and not about you. I know you're trying to educate people about your company. If they want to learn about your company, they will learn about your company. Educate them about something they care more about first. And then they'll care more about those other things. So make it about the reader, not about you. Deliver something of value and interest to them, which may not necessarily be valuable or interesting to you. So there are 3 types of announcements or newsletters I'm going to talk about today. It's the traditional e-news, a promotion, and a press release or announcement. I think press release is kind of an ancient term because we don't have press the way that we used to. But announcements are also a great way to communicate. Put a little personality into it, but don't let your personality dominate. Then they'll lose the message if you're a little bit too cute. And then always remember that we have short attention spans. One of the most, I'm getting off track here anecdotally, but back when I started traveling a lot back in the 80s, when I was doing shows, the magazine, newspaper USA Today had just come out. It was a national paper. It was showing up in hotels, and the traditional journalists and traditional newspaper people hated it because it was short articles and bullet points. What do we read today? We read short articles with bullet points. USA Today was 20 years ahead of the curve in how we want to consume information, and our attention span keeps getting shorter and shorter. So USA Today is writing shorter and shorter articles with more bullet points. So there you go. So let's dissect a newsletter. I'm going to use my Intentional Success newsletter. This is the one you get every Monday morning. If you don't, go to my website and sign up for it. It's really awesome. Here's the structure. This is not the only way to do it. This is the way I do it. There's lots of other examples of people that do that. I do it in Constant Contact. There's MailChimp. There's all sorts of email systems where you can send an HTML-based email. And you want to do that because you can pick a format and a structure that will allow it to adapt easily to mobile devices, phones and iPads and tablets and things like that. You need a title header. If you're creating your newsletter for the first time, just steal it from your website. You don't have to go to any great lengths. You've already got a graphic that you're using somewhere that you can probably adapt. Throw some links to social media somewhere in the newsletter. And if you're using an email, a newsletter client like a Constant Contact, they've got tools that let you automatically drop it in. It's really actually quite easy. Newsletters tend to come in blocks. So in the first block, I recommend you put a short article or blog in its entirety. There is a school of thought and there's an appropriate time to put a short piece of an article that forces the reader to click and go somewhere. However, in my experience, and I do a lot of newsletters for a lot of years, I find that readers want one complete thing that they can consume while they're looking there. They're much more likely to look at your email and see the other values in it if you give them something they can consume in 2 minutes, probably tops. Short article blog, pictures are a nice touch. I don't have a picture in the example here, but that would be nice. Make sure that blog, whatever is in the newsletter, also exists on your website. I'm not personally really good about that, but we are making that change right now, where that little blog at the beginning of my newsletter is also going to be a blog post in my website. So there's more than one way to consume it. Repurposing your content is very important in this process. In it, you want as many hyperlinks as you can to other blog posts or feature pages, something that will take them to your website. Don't inundate it, but if you have a couple in a block, that's a good start. Now the second block is generally I want to make some media, some content that they can download, or a link to a gallery that will definitely take them out of the newsletter somewhere else. Okay. I want that. This is a click-through. I want to make sure that I get a click-through. So people will click through more often for videos than they will for other things. They will click through for market research and surveys and things like that. So experiment a little bit, find out what they click through for. At the bottom, you need a call to action. This is boilerplate. You'll reuse it over and over again, or some variation of it. And the call to action is, it's something to the effect that if you want to learn more, click here. If you want to receive this free thing, click here. It's something that is a clear indication of what they should do next in order to engage with you as a business. And then you've got a footer of some sort, and one tells us when the newsletter is over, but it's a way to put in more links and maintain the look, and you end up with a nice look this way if somebody ever actually looks at it full screen. Now, that's an e-newsletter. You can follow that format. It's very easy to fill content. There's not a lot of content demand. The second block, you can repurpose content over the year and revisit things. But that blog piece or whatever you put up top, and it could be a short story about with some photographs about an accomplishment, a picture of a client, a story of the testimonial from a client, all sorts of things you can do. Now, promotions, and I'll talk more about what you can do for blog pieces here in just a minute. I came up with some things that will help those of you who are blog impaired. Promotions are something that solves a problem, and most of us know promotions because we get, we think of it as spam. That's those emails that we get that we delete right away. In mail, promotions are those postcards that we get in the mail. Okay, that's a promotion right there. It's telling us about something. Emails will do that as well. If you don't want your promotion to be regarded as spam, don't treat it like an advertisement. Solve a problem. Your product, your service, whatever it is you're trying to promote exists because it solves a problem. Talk about the problem. Offer some sort of value. I should be better educated after looking at your promotion. Okay, value in terms of this is a promotion because you can save money, or you can make your money go farther, or it's for a limited amount of time. A promotion needs a clear call to action, much more clear than we have in the newsletter, which is a casual call to action. And then there's a little bit of something that tells a little bit more about what you do. So here is a good example, or a typical example of a promotional email. And this is this looks like a regular e-newsletter, but it's actually a promotion. And it starts off with, we have a header that makes it clear who it's from, which is actually kind of important. It's got a nice eye-catching pic, which is relevant to what the email is about. It has a headline. Headlines are important in promotions. They're also very important in press releases and announcements. Details about what the promotion is. Lots of hyperlinks. Make sure it's easy for mobile users to use these things. I find that mobile users actually pay more attention to promotional emails because they're sitting there on the phone because they're bored than those of us who get them on our desktop computers or at our office desk. A distinctive call to action. I know it's hard to see here, but there's a click here to register for the event that they're promoting. Very clear, very distinctive, not a hidden button, not a hyperlink buried in the text. You've got an opportunity to put another block in here, share more about what your company does, maybe about your company or what your company can do. They've taken the opportunity to invite us to an event, and then, oh, by the way, here's what we do. Here's the types of products that we support and represent. And then at the bottom, they have how to find you, the links to social, basically all the things that we would expect to find on a website so that we understand who we're dealing with. A lot of times before we register for something, we want a little bit more information about who the host is, or who's putting on the promotion. All right, now press releases. The traditional one is you send them to the trade publications that your clients read. And when I started, consulting 10 years ago, and I did press releases, print magazines. Here we go. Print magazines still existed. I probably, when I left my last job at Alfred Media, I was probably getting 10 of these a week. That's a lot. I mean, there's a ton of magazines we used to be subscribing to. I now get about 3 a month that are still in print. However, all of them are online now. Many of those titles still exist. They just manifest in a different way. So you would send these to your trade publications so that they can put it in their web news and their resources, and they're hungry for content. They aren't going to charge you anything for it. If you want it promoted, they will charge you for it, but if you just want it in there, they're happy to take your content. And then send it to your mailing list. So just like we sent the promotion, we would send a press release, same mailing list we send the e-news to. Now, here's an example of a press release. Here's a company who's opened a new office in Southern California. So we have the header that's showing who it's from, which is probably looks just like their newsletter. I don't know. They've got an eye-catching pic. They have the headline, which is important, so we know what it's about. They've chosen a picture to equal 1,000 words, but they do have some text in there that tells them anyway. And then here's a clear call to action. Start your tour, which tells me that there's a video somewhere on the other side that's going to walk me around this new office, which might be actually kind of cool. So a good clear call to action. And then the usual stuff. Here's the footer. How to find you, learn more, blah, blah, blah. It's all right there. Same format, very compelling, very consistent, and we know how to navigate it, which is important to reduce rejection rates and keep your cursor off that unsubscribe button. Now, a quick note about unsubscribes here, because I know I'm going to get the question. Unsubscribes are okay. Get over it. People are scared to death of unsubscribes. Don't worry about it. Now, it's easy for me to say that because I've got thousands and thousands of subscribers, and if I lose a few here or there, it's no big deal. Remember, you are trying to talk to the people who want to hear from you. If they don't want to hear from you, don't worry about it. They're going to consume the information another way, or maybe they're just not your target audience. So if all you have is 100 readers and 100 of them can't wait for your email and they do business with you and say good things about you, that's way better than having 1,000 people that you send an email to and 90% of them don't read it. All right? So don't worry about the unsubscribes. All right, next question. Blogs and content. So we're really struggling with blogs or any content for that matter. Can you give us some guidelines of what these are supposed to look like? Yes, I've worked with several folks recently who are trying to squeeze blogs out of their organization, and sometimes it's really painful to watch. It's like, yeah, no, guys, you're not writing a dissertation. This is not a, they're making it much harder than it needs to be, and it's lack of experience, it's lack of knowledge. So let me share a little bit for you. As somebody who does probably no less than 8 or 10 blog posts a month. No, you don't see all of them because some of them get, but I generally publish 8 or 10 a month through the newsletters and websites and whatever, social media. There's a system for doing it. I want to take you through one. So how to blog. A lot of blogging is just sharing an opinion. And there's lots of bloggers out there that are very successful in doing that, but you're trying to run a business that has a product or service. So teach or share. Teaching and sharing doesn't have to be about your core expertise. As a matter of fact, it doesn't have to be something that you personally know. You can share other people's knowledge in a blog. Interview someone who knows something that would be interesting to your target audience is perfectly acceptable. Anytime you blog, if you can connect it, whatever it might be, back to the industry, your clients or profession, that would be an awesome thing. Try and make one key point, one complete thought, and save something for later. Don't try and write the definitive piece on whatever it is you're writing about. Leave something to the imagination, leave something to write about later. Be counterintuitive, be pithy, Um, uh, Certainly be smart if that's a quality that we can dictate, and incorporate a call to action. Put something at the end about learning more, or use your boilerplate, whatever you need to do to get people to know that there's life beyond this. Um, so here's some quick topics. We're going to get you started. You need to write a blog post. You've got a company slogan somewhere. It's on your website. It's underneath your company name. It's hanging on the wall. Write a blog post on what your slogan means to you. How long does a blog post need to be? 250 words, maybe 300. If you do more than that, you're inefficient, you're using too many words, you're trying to share too much information. Now, I write blog posts all the time that are 400 and 500 words. Your results may vary, but technically I'm a professional at this. There's method to my madness. If you're new to it, keep it short. The discipline will help you write better. Write a blog on what are the 5 keys to a successful project. Or you can make it 7, you can make it 3, you can make it 10. 5's a nice number. Just make a number up and write to it. There's no wrong answer. Later on, you can say, you know what? I actually think there's 6, and now you can write another blog post and introduce the 6th quality. Don't worry about getting things wrong. Interview a client. Interview a client about career advice to a young person in their field. What a flattering thing to ask a client to do. What a great invitation as a client to get from a partner. Anything that inspires you or motivates you, or in my case, if I have a visceral response to something, I'm going to write about it, because that passion is what's going to get you a good outcome. Now, I'm going to walk you through an example here. I was meeting with my marketing guru this week. He gave me a prompt that, just as an example, is, write the 7 myths of intentional success. Intentional success is one of my trademark, as well as my newsletter. It's also a service. So write about that. I said, okay, well, I don't know if there's 7 myths, but it's a great number to work with. It's easy to do a graphic for. So let's just write it really quick. So how do you write it? So you start off with a thesis, and the thesis is just a statement. What's the background? And what I said was, when my readers contemplate the meaning of intentional success, they often add their own interpretation to that meaning. Well, that needs a little bit of editing, but that's okay. This is a draft. While I admit that ideas do have a life of their own, I think it's important to explain away some myths that have developed about intentional success. Great. Then I have a background paragraph that says, intentional success is the life and business philosophy that your goals are inherently correct and that obstacles along the way, while worthy, are there to be overcome. And then I share a story. So if you can write, and you can do a story in 3 sentences, trust me. If you can't, don't put a story in here. And then here's the list. Now, this list needs to be edited, it needs to be shortened, but I just sat down and came up, what are some myths about intentional success that I'm aware of? And here they are. I rattled off a list, and then I will briefly expand on each one. So the first one on the list was this: not about trajectory. So intentional success isn't about the straight shot to a goal. It's about the journey. So journey, not trajectory. So I create a title paragraph, and I do a short paragraph about embracing the path changes, but show your team that the goal is not going to be altered, because in intentional success, you stick to the goal and you alter your path to get there, right? Then you get through all of that, and then you do your conclusion. So this conclusion is, hey, we have a lot of choices when it comes to management philosophies, but regardless of what you embrace, it's vital that you intellectualize the concept, blah, 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 blah. Write a conclusion. There's a blog post on an idea or something that you're passionate about. There's blog posts. I do Venn diagrams. That's what are the 3 things that you have to do in order to have a successful project? The client needs to clearly define their intentions and uses. We need to have a great process to incorporate that into the design, and we have to have flawless delivery. And if we don't have flawless delivery, then we're going to have cost overruns. All of these things will build themselves if you know how to ask the right questions. All right. I'm having a great week. Can you tell? I hope you are too. So I have another question here about proposals. I made my first presentation yesterday with the scope of work that says everything we talked about, which is something that I talk about in some of my workshops. The best proposal is the one that says everything we talked about, $50,000. He says it was very successful. He said, well, until the CEO got involved and he wanted an equipment list. All right. I've been fighting the transparency and the commoditization of what we do for almost 15 years now. It was one of the first things I wrote about when I started writing for trade magazines, trying to become an expert. Here, let's go to the service proposal template. In the service proposal, and you guys remember this webinar, Better Proposals for Service Companies, where I talk about this, even a proposal that says everything we talked about is a form of the service proposal template. And what it does is it simply compresses everything to match the conceptual agreement between you and the customer. The challenge for the person who sent the question in is that he didn't realize that his contact wasn't the decision maker and therefore wasn't the ultimate customer. And that's not uncommon in our industry. So while getting to conceptual agreement with the buyer, in his case, was easy, they both knew what they were talking about. Buyers have bosses. It might be a committee, it might be a manager, it might be, God help us, procurement, but we have to write proposals for them. So even though these two obviously had a close relationship and it didn't seem to make sense to write this form of a proposal, he needed to. He could have made it tighter, but he needed to write it for the person that was going to share in the information. In other words, for his contact's boss. You can make a service proposal as long or as short as you need to. If I'm selling to a committee, I'm going to make it longer. I'm going to use more words. I'm going to make more points because I don't know what each committee member needs. So I'm going to try and speak to a wide audience. If I'm dealing directly with the owner of a company, as I often do, I can write a much shorter proposal template because I've done 90% of my selling before I've ever written the proposal. In fact, I rarely write proposals. I mostly write agreements, which is what the everything we talked about proposal is. So this person who sent the email in, he wrote an agreement when what he actually needed was a proposal. However, keep trying. You did the right thing. Unfortunately, it wasn't the right situation, and I hope you've had some success out of that. All right, so it looks like we're coming to the end here. If you guys have some more questions, feel free to type them in. And while you're thinking about that, let me bring up something I brought up in the yesterday's webinar, which I hope you saw, is Jumpstart Sales and Marketing Workshop. So we have a new workshop coming up. I am tentatively scheduling this for August 1st and 2nd here in Dallas. We're getting the initial pricing together. I'm looking for the first 10 or 20 folks to register. And matter of fact, I'm almost 10 as of, in less than 24 hours. So what I'm asking you to do is, if you're interested in sending 1, 2, 5, or 10 of your sales team to a 2-day workshop where you're going to get everything I think I know about sales and marketing that applies to your business, give you some tools, work through some case studies, work through some exchanges like we did yesterday on ideation to help you to find more value to bring to your customers so you can win higher profit, higher margin jobs, expand your universe, do better negotiating, all those things. I'm going to cram 2 days worth of this stuff into this thing, and it's all geared for you, the AV person. So if you're in project sales of any ilk, this is for you and for your team. Shoot me an email. Let me know how many people you want to bring, and I'm going to share some preliminary pricing with you. And we will be launching this in probably sometime in the next few weeks. I got to find a venue and get all of that set up. But we'll have some preliminary pricing for a short time. So if you want to get in on that, shoot me an email. I'll share a little bit more information about it and get you on the list for the first wave of signups. All right. And then also standing invitation, anytime you want a conversation with me, go to my website, schedule a call, hits my calendar. Happy to answer questions, talk through things. And certainly if you're interested in a product or service that I offer, love to talk about that anytime. But I don't care. If you just want to ask a question or shoot the breeze, by all means, just pick up the phone, shoot me an email, schedule something. I'm happy to talk with you. All right, so I see no questions forthcoming. So I'll remind you that you have in your calendar event, there's the login page that gets you to the archived videos of this. Today's video will be up online in nothing flat. It really, certainly before I'm done by the end of the day and open up a bottle of wine, it'll be online. Send your questions in, ideas, suggestions, always welcome. Share it with your team, all that kind of good stuff. And there you go. Whoosh, that was fun. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.